Okay, um, David, can you spend a few minutes in talking about Pamela and her contributions?
I can do that. Remembering Pamela Mar. This is Pamela, in case you're wondering, in one of her costumes she made. Through the magic of technology, placed in front of Blenheim Palace, which also was one of her favorite places at one time. Today we're going to take a few minutes to recognize and remember Pamela Mar, a woman whose commitment to the community, our heritage, and service to Nanaimo helped shape our society and the heritage community in lasting ways. Pamela arrived in 1971 to Nanaimo, having moved from London, England. It was a major transition for her. She left behind a responsible position with the Bank of England to settle in a city at that time of just 14,000 people. But love brought her here, and Nanaimo became her lifelong home when she married Jacques Mar, who was an anaesthetist at the hospital. From the time she arrived in Nanaimo, Pamela chose to be deeply involved in her new community. One of her earliest commitments was to the Nanaimo Regional Hospital Auxiliary, an organization she supported for more than 50 years. In the early 1970s was also a time when interest in local heritage was growing across Canada. Pamela was right at the forefront of that movement here. She became one of Nanaimo's pioneers in researching and delivering heritage walking tours of the downtown core, helping residents and visitors alike see familiar streets through new eyes. I do recall her in the 90s, downtown, leading a group of people with her little flag on a standard, a little green pennant, so you could follow Pamela as she was taking people through along Commercial Street. She also played the role of the formation of the now defunct Nanaimo Heritage Commission, a city commission, which promoted the conservation and awareness of Nanaimo's built heritage, monuments, and landscapes. Many people, however, knew Pamela best through her extraordinary volunteer work at the Nanaimo Museum. Over the years, she dedicated more than 8,000 hours to developing the museum's rather extraordinary textile collection. This collection was unusual for a community museum, but under Pamela and her dedicated team's care, it became a major strength. Her fashion exhibitions were always popular, and importantly, they invited visitors often traveling from Vancouver to Nanaimo to explore the rest of the museum and deepening their understanding of Nanaimo's long history and its role in early British Columbia. Pamela and her husband, Dr. Jacques Marc, were also long supportive of the Nanaimo Historical Society. Drawing upon her their lectures were carefully researched and thoughtfully presented, setting a standard that many still remember. Drawing upon her professional experience, Pamela also organized and managed a highly successful publication committee, including the landmark project in 1989, Nanaimo Retrospective. Those who work with Pamela often describe her as energetic, precise, and exceptionally organized. More than one friend remarked that she's especially good at working the room. It was through Pamela and other dedicated volunteers of her generation that the Historical Society truly thrived. They set a bar that remains, for the rest of us, a real challenge to meet. To fully appreciate Pamela, it helps to know something about her family background. She was born in England in 1931 into a family known for determination and her principle. Her mother, Elsie Borders, a housewife, became something of a British folk hero after challenging a well-connected building society over serious construction defects in their home. Taking on the legal system, she could not afford one without a lawyer. She actually went to the London School of Economics for 6 months and read law so she could prepare her case. The defendants, a major building society in England, were represented by a very prominent barrister at the time, a man named R.F. Roxborough. She was very successful in arguing her case. The judge certainly sympathized with her. It was a very challenging case. She won the case, but unfortunately lost it on appeal. But today, legally, it is still regarded as an influential legal precedent, and law students still study it in England. Was that significant? Decades later, there's one of Pamela when she was 4 years old. It's hard to imagine her, but that is Pamela, her mother Elsie, who's a very interesting woman to read about. If you look online, Elsie Borders, you can probably spend several hours reading about Elsie's life as an activist, and her husband Jim, who was a London taxi driver. Decades later, Pamela also won a number of awards and involvement, including one from the Chamber of Commerce as the Citizen of the Year. Let's say back here, decades later, this story caught attention from the BBC, and I'll be talking about that a bit later on. Pamela won a number of awards, Chamber of Commerce Citizen of the Year. She was recognized again for what she does. She's very self-effacing. She was reluctant to take credit. She certainly promoted others and was very good in promoting the society itself too. Decades later, the story caught renewed attention. The BBC produced a radio drama based on it, and in 2025, Elsie herself was recognized with one of these blue plaques on their home in Kent. The home, although it was described as shoddy construction, 98 years later, is still standing. Thank you. So, Pamela took great amusement in seeing her family story rediscovered so many years later. Pamela received many formal honors for her contributions over the years, including the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, recognition from the Beach Sea Achievement Foundation, the Nanaimo Historical Society Distinguished Service Award, which we can see her receiving here from Mayor Prague in 2020, Nanaimo's John Thompson Memorial Heritage Award, and Citizen of the Year from the Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce. In her later years, despite facing serious health challenges, Pamela remained curious, engaged, and well-informed. She followed the world events closely, often with the BBC World News on in the background, or she enjoyed watching the classic film channel sometimes too. Pamela passed away in early November 2025, but her legacy lives on in our institutions and in our shared history. And an example she set for the rest of us through a lifetime of service. Nanaimo is richer for having had her. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. It's a welcome back, so to speak, because Haley's been here before, and that was about, I'm going to say 5 years ago. So, Haley is a high school counselor, registered clinical counselor, and the best-selling author of books for all ages about extraordinary historical women. Her books include Huxley's Island Adventure, which is about a cat, right? Oh, my kind of gal. And the Trailblazing Canadian series, which includes Her Courage Rises, On Their Own Terms, True Stories of Trailblazing Women of Vancouver Island, and Flourishing and Free, More Stories of Trailblazing Women of Vancouver Island. Haley enjoys exploring Vancouver Island's trails, waters, and wilderness. She lives in Nanaimo with her husband and 2 small children. So, I don't want to go on and on. Welcome, Haley.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, everyone. I'm honored to be here this evening with all of you on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of this Nanaimo First Nation. And I'm just really happy to be here to talk to you about my book that's coming out on April 21st of this year. So I'm going to start with a story that's going to just let you know how I got into writing about amazing trailblazing women. So this story takes place north of Tofino at a place called Boat Basin. Maybe some of you have been there. Anyone been to Boat Basin? With a show of hands. It's Boat Basin is the home of Cougar Annie's Garden. You may have heard of this place. So Cougar Annie was born in California in 1888. She arrived in 1915 to Boat Basin, which is about an hour by boat from Tofino, just to give you a bit of an idea. No roads go there. It is only accessible by boat and float plane. So Cougar Annie ended up there in 1915 with her husband and a few of her children. She would spend about 60 years there. She would have 11 children there. She ran a post office, had beautiful, legendary gardens. She raised chickens, goats. She had a post office, and a little later she had a mail order nursery where she would send out her dahlia bulbs and gladiolus bulbs all over the world. So she's quite an interesting character. Her name comes to her, Cougar Annie, because she also hunted cougars for bounty to supplement her other sources of income. She was apparently a sharpshooter, and and there was quite a bounty on cougars at that time. So in 1985 she passed, and Peter Buckland, who was a prospector in the area, who had become very good friends with her, purchased the property. It's still possible to go there today. So it would have been 2018, I did a hike called the Hesquiat Peninsula. We hiked around the peninsula, and at the very end we got a tour of Cougar Annie's garden. And I was completely amazed by Cougar Annie's story. And I just kind of wondered, I hadn't heard of her. I just wondered, are there more historic women like this who are quite amazing and nobody had heard of? And it turns out there were. So I put together a manuscript with some of the women I found, and On Their Own Terms is up on the top left. I put together the manuscript. I sent it off to some places and was very, very pleasantly surprised to hear back. And from Heritage House wanted to publish On Their Own Terms for their Amazing Stories series. So after that, there were some women who, we had missed, and we put them in Flourishing and Free. And then, Immortal Grit is a fiction about the 1883 coal mining disaster. And then also a modern day university student that their stories collide in an old heritage house, 102 Fry Street, if anyone knows it, that old yellow house. Her Courage Rises is 50 Trailblazing Women of the BC and the Yukon. And then the Trailblazing Canadian series is a children's book series, Huxley's Island Adventures, more about nature. My research, I do many places. I don't want to talk about it too much, but lots of different archives. As much as possible, we talk to family members and get their permission, do sensitivity checks, and just try to get the best information possible. And also, like, old newspapers is like a huge source of research. So today, I wanted to talk about 6 women from So She Went Ahead, 50 Trailblazing Women of the Prairie Provinces. So this is it's the second book to this one. Her Courage Rises is British Columbia and the Yukon. And I love gold rush history so much. So Her Courage Rises has many gold rush women in it. So She Went Ahead is Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. It's broken down into kind of categories like businesswomen, midwives, nurses, doctors, mountaineers, explorers, scientists, brave homesteaders, artists. And I don't have the book with me because I don't have author copies yet, but it's very similar to this one. There's a page illustration by Kimiko Fraser, who's an illustrator from Victoria, and then there's about a page or two of writing about each woman. So Her Courage Rises will look very similar to this one, size, format. So I've chosen 6 women to talk to you about today, and I'm not going to talk super long on each one, but I wanted to give a little bit of a broad overview. I think I am a little heavy on Alberta. I realized when I went through them, I didn't, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, I think I left out a little bit, but that was not intentional. So I wanted to start with Flores Ledoux. Flores Ledoux was American. She grew up on a ranch in Minnesota. Apparently she could ride horses before she could walk. The shotgun markswoman sharpshooter Annie Oakley was her childhood hero. And when she was 17 years old, she ran away from home. She changed her name from Grace Benzel to Flores Ledoux, and she got hired on with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. There she met Guy Wiedeck, who was a cowboy and also worked for these Wild West shows. They got married and they worked these Wild West shows around the world. Then together they dreamed up their very own rodeo competition. And it would take place in Calgary, Canada. So in 1912, the very first Calgary Stampede started up. By 1923, it had grown to include a parade, a bull riding competition, steer wrestling, a midway, agricultural fair, stage shows, and of course, fancy roping competitions. So this is what Flores Ledoux got into. Basically, fancy roping is when you do different tricks with a rope while being on a horseback. And she was very, very skilled at this. The Calgary Stampede is now called, some call it, the greatest outdoor show on earth. Flores Ledoux was only 5 feet tall, but apparently she was very tough, very strong, and could lasso 5 horses at a time even while lying down. So she won 3 world titles in trick roping. She was inducted into the National Cowgirl Museum and Hall of Fame, but mostly she was famous for thinking up and founding the Calgary Stampede along with her husband. But I think he might be more credited for it. So yeah, really glad to include her here. She lived 1883 until 1951. I meant to mention that at the start just to kind of frame it in time. So Ella Cora Hind was a wheat expert, a suffragist, and a journalist. She lived 1861 until 1942. She was born in Toronto, Ontario. She went to high school in Orillia, Ontario, just down the road from where I grew up in Little Bracebridge, Muskoka, Ontario. She was raised by her grandfather. He taught her about farming, livestock, and crops. When she was 21, she moved to Winnipeg. She tried getting work at the Manitoba Free Press, but they wouldn't hire her because she was a woman. So she worked in stenography, so writing in shorthand, and she was a receptionist at a law firm. But the job that made her most famous was as a wheat expert and an agricultural journalist and editor for the Manitoba Free Press. So yes, she worked many years at other jobs, then she got hired on at the same newspaper that initially wouldn't hire her. So Cora Hind predicted wheat yields for particular years to within less than 1% of margin of error. She was very, very skilled at this. When she was in her 70s, so this was the mid-30s, she visited many countries to learn about crop yields and how climate change was affecting grain farming. She wrote 2 books about her travels and what she learned. So she was so exceptionally good at crop yield predictions that grain traders, government officials, and farmers relied on her forecasts to set the markets and the prices. She later got into women's rights. She campaigned for women getting the right to vote. She worked alongside Nellie McClung, who of course helped Manitoba women get the right to vote in 1916. I did want to mention though, I think it's important to mention that not all Canadian women, when each province was allowed to vote, not all Canadian women had that opportunity at that time. So Indigenous women and some other marginalized groups didn't always have the opportunity to vote at that time. Some not even until 1960, I think. So Mildred Ware lived 1871 till 1905. She was born in Whitby, Ontario in 1871. She worked as a teacher, and then her family moved to Alberta. And when she was 21, she got married in Calgary to John Ware, who was a really famous early rancher. He was a pretty legendary cowboy and horseman, and one of the first black ranchers in all of Western Ontario. So Mildred and John ranched in Millerville, Alberta, just south of Calgary. They were really good at ranching. They grew their herd of cattle from 200 to a herd of over 1,000. They eventually moved to a ranch in Red Deer River, north of Brooks, Alberta. Ranch life was very difficult work, physically hard, long days, contending with really cold temperatures, drought. At one point their house flooded. They had to build a new one. Mildred did all the accounting for the farm. She taught her kids to read and write. She milked cows, sold the butter. Both Mildred and John died tragically. John died when a horse fell into a badger hole. Mildred to illness less than a year later. She was only 34 years old. So John Ware had quite an epic reputation as a rancher. There's a National Film Board of Canada film about him that's called John Ware Reclaimed. And so Mildred is, of course, like included in that. And I just love the National Film Board of Canada films. I just go through it and search different words. And I think most of them are still free now, and I just love them. So I did watch that to just kind of check all my research over for Mildred's profile in the book. So Mary Schaefer Warren lived 1861 to 1939. She was the first non-Indigenous woman to reach Maligne Lake in Jasper. She was born Mary Townsend Sharpless in Philadelphia. She married a botanist and physician named Charles Schaefer in 1890, and together they loved to travel. They ended up spending a lot of time in the Canadian Rockies, and they were working on a book about alpine wildflowers for the riders on the newly completed Canadian Pacific Railroad passengers. So they worked hard on this for years. Then tragically, Charles passed suddenly in 1903. Mary was a widow at 42, and she was left with hundreds of watercolor paintings and photos and this incomplete botany book that they had started. So despite her grief, she went back and she hired someone like a curator to help her. She didn't have all the scientific knowledge to complete all of it herself, but she did hire someone to help her. And she found that the plants and the art really helped her with her grief. So in 1907, Alpine Flora and Fauna of the Canadian Rockies was published, and she, of course, dedicated it to Charles. In 1911, she was hired to survey Maligne Lake. It was uncharted at that point, so she went and did that. She did some other pretty epic trips, canoeing along the North Saskatchewan River, 16-week backcountry mountain trips. She went to Japan for months on end. She eventually made Banff her permanent home. She did remarry a mountain guide named Billy Warren. And she did leave quite a legacy in Banff. There's quite a bit about her at the White Museum of the Canadian Rockies in Banff, and there's a Mount Schaefer named after her. So there were, at the time that Mary Schaefer Warren was venturing into the wilderness and doing very, very difficult trips, very few women were venturing into the wilderness at all to recreationally. So it was pretty amazing for her time. And that's a boat on Maligne Lake current day. So Suzette Chalifou Swift was a Métis homesteader. I always enjoy when I find women in my books who knew each other or they came into contact with each other in some way. And so Mary Schaefer Warren and Suzette Chalifou Swift were this. Mary Schaefer Warren came to Suzette's homestead and bought a buckskin jacket from her. Suzette did absolutely beautiful tan deer hide beading, on tan deer hide, she would make beaded gloves, moccasins, bags, tobacco pouches, coats, and boots. So Mary Schaefer Warren had bought one of these from Suzette, and it actually, Mary ended up being called Buckskin Mary sometimes because of this absolutely beautiful jacket. So Suzette was born in St. Albert, north of Edmonton in 1866. She was working as a house cleaner in Edmonton when she met Lewis Swift, who was a trapper and a prospector from Ohio. They married and moved to a homestead east of Jasper. It was called Swift Ranch or Palisade Ranch, named for the view of the Jasper Palisades, so a big long row of cliffs. As I mentioned, Suzette was known for her really beautiful tanned deer hide clothes. She made all the clothes for herself, her husband, and her children. And there's some of her work is still at the Jasper Yellowhead Museum and Archives. Some of her paper embroidery patterns and her really intricately beaded vests and jackets. So for 30 years, Suzette and Louis homesteaded in Jasper. They had 4 children, and there really weren't many people apparently homesteading in this area, so their homestead was a common place that people would stop in on their way through. And they were apparently wonderful hosts. So Ida Owen was born in 1879, and she lived till 1957. I think she's one of the most unique stories, and so she went ahead. I'm not sure if it's like your children, you're not supposed to have favorites, but she's probably my favorite if I am allowed to have one in this book. I think her story is so interesting. So she was born in 1879 in England. She ended up being a meteorologist in Edmonton. So in 1908, Ida, her husband, and her daughter moved from England to Edmonton. Her husband, Herbert, was the official provincial weather observer. So he worked from their home, which is on the right, and called the Owen residence. The house was a meteorological station. So they lived there and worked there. I kind of was thinking as I was researching this, like they took working from home to a whole new level. He taught Ida how to use all the equipment and instruments, for meteorological instruments, so she could help him. And then Herbert enlisted for the First World War. So sadly, he died at war, and Ida took over for him. Though she was a natural replacement, it was absolutely a tragic way for her to get the position. So despite grieving, being in shock, and raising their daughter solo, she took over the position straight away. Her day began at 5:30 in the morning when she'd climb a ladder onto her roof and take her first measurements. She had to take hourly weather readings from 36 different meteorological instruments. On the roof, there was a spinning anemometer, which was measured wind speed and wind pressure. There were lots of different rain and snow gauges, thermometers, hydrometers, different things to measure humidity. This seems a little difficult, but she would also have to take phone calls from reporters and lay people who were wanting to know the weather, despite having to send all the measurements in. So I think, nowadays, like there'd be some kind of boundaries around that. A little bit ridiculous, I think, but the information at her station predicted the weather for Alberta and was used across all of North America. It was the second largest meteorological station in Canada. So it was highly unusual for a woman to work in science fields like this at that time. And she just loved weather. She was so passionate about it. And she apparently also just loved the Northern Lights and predicting when the river would break up. So I don't know if anyone's ever lived in a town where there's a river that freezes over, but it's like a thing. I lived in Old Crow, Yukon, and it's a real thing to guess when breakup would happen. So she was really into that. In Edmonton. So she became known as the Weather Woman of the West, and she ran this meteorological station out of her home for 28 years. So I also wanted to point out a couple things just about the illustrations, and I did want to give a shout out to Kimiko Fraser, who's the illustrator from Victoria. Kimiko's like a historian herself. She reads my pieces, but she also does a lot of her own research, and she does a lot of research into the clothing of the time, and she really does a fabulous job of it. She also always does some objects that go with the woman who she's writing, so in every one she's done that and makes the frame really go with the woman. So I really wanted to mention Kimiko. She also works for Heritage House and is a freelance illustrator as well. So I wanted to just let you know really briefly about a few other ones. There's a painter named Honora Brown from Fort Macleod, Alberta. A physicist and cancer radiation technician named Sylvia Federock. Maybe some of us have heard of her before. She's from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Her story was amazing and so interesting to research. And Jenny Flett was a midwife, and she was called, like, known as the dog sled midwife. She often traveled by dog sled to get to like very, very remote places to deliver babies, and she delivered hundreds of babies and was a very, very skilled at what she did. So these are just a few that I just wanted to mention really briefly to get you hopefully interested in So She Went Ahead when it comes out in April. It's available at any local bookstores. And yeah, it was really amazing to include, to kind of go into the prairie provinces and discover some pretty amazing women. So I wasn't sure if there were any questions. If not, that's okay. I really skimmed over the research part. I can go back and speak a little to the research if people want. Yeah.
I can't remember her first name, but Shalafu Swift. I was just wondering if in your research, if you found if she's related to the Nanaimo poet Amy Shalafu, who has won a number. My son recently studied her for his English class, and she's Métis as well. So I'm just thinking.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see if she had any like relatives in Nanaimo. We did like contact somebody, but I think they were. I'd have to remember. They were from like somewhere further east, who we contacted to like check over the story. But I'd be curious. Yes, for sure.
She wrote a poem on International Women's Day.
Oh, okay. And she lives in Nanaimo?
Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing. Yeah, fabulous, yes.
Oh, thank you, Haley. That was really awesome. I'm quite compelled by the title of your upcoming book, Her Courage Rises. I would love to hear a little bit more about the context of why you called it, and maybe some of the traits of women in the past, but also in the future, in the present, who do require a lot of courage, and why courage, and why would you say rises? So I'd just like to hear your reflections on that.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. So I guess I can mention, I'll just go to the very start. So She Went Ahead is a quote from Violet King Henry, who, oh, here she is. Violet King Henry, who was under politician and judges. So She Went Ahead was a quote from Violet King Henry, who was a lawyer, and I believe she was the first Black lawyer in Canada. And I don't have her exact quote, but it went something like, they told me I couldn't, so I went ahead. And it was changed to So She Went Ahead, so it made it a little bit make more sense. To be completely honest, the editor and one of like the publishers actually chose it. So I didn't choose I provided a bunch of different quotes, but yeah, the editor of the book and at the publishers actually chose it to be the title. And Her Courage Rises is the same thing. It was actually chosen by the publisher as well. And it's a quote by, I believe, is it? Just a minute. It's a famous quote from, and I should know this off the top of my head, Bronte. So she went, Her Courage Rises, and I should have it here, just a minute. It's a famous quote from like some famous literature, and I should know who that is. And yes.
The problem is there were three, right?
Yes. I should have it. Yeah, and then I thought we talked about it in the introduction, but I don't think I did. So yeah, so they were chosen for me. I had a couple of other ones, but they were not picked. Yeah.
I just find it compelling because women now and throughout history have always had, a bias against them, and even when you study history itself, it tends to have quite a patriarchal view on things. So, in light of it being just having International Women's Day, like I just wanted to acknowledge, I guess, that women have always had a disadvantage or a bias or barriers against them. But last thing you want to do is tell a woman that she can't do anything, and so I just think that really, the overall context speaks to the determination of women to overcome the barriers just based on their gender. So that's why I was just so curious, and I was like, yeah, when I saw the book titles. So,
Absolutely,
yes,
yeah.
I think it's really fantastic that there's such empowering titles.
Thank
For
you.
the power of women. And,
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah. So yay, women.
Thank you so much. Yes, for sure. And you know, it was amazing when I was doing my research. I almost feel embarrassed to say this, like to find information about the women, I had to like search their husbands many times.
Yeah.
And the same for these two as well. Even for like Amelia Douglas, you know, like very, very well-known woman. I had to, you know, find stuff about her husband to find information about her.
Yeah.
So
You'd even have to take her husband's name, like Mrs. whatever the husband's name is, and it's like.
yes, or how many women too, I researched who had to quit their jobs when they got married. Like that was shocking as well. And Emma Stark, of course, who was from right here in Nanaimo. Yeah, she stopped teaching. She stopped teaching when she got married. So, yeah, yes.
Just congratulations in dealing with this particular issue in Alberta. I grew up in Alberta. I was there until I was 35. And I don't think I heard any of those names. But it's kind of interesting. The other thing that occurs to me is that how important sometimes the women are for famous men, and how
Sometimes.
they are now being recognized as being an important part of the. It's a duo.
Yes.
Rather than a male.
Yes, for sure. And Minnie Patterson, she's in Flourishing and Free, for sure. She was another one who like helped her husband a lot with work and was not paid for it, like not compensated for it, not given the credit for it. She was a lighthouse keeper out at Cape Beale, out by Bamfield, and she worked all the equipment on the lights. Like she did probably the lion's share of like raising the children and, you know, homeschooling them out at a lighthouse where there's no schools. And yeah, and so, but yeah, she wasn't compensated as an assistant keeper, which she was probably essentially that. And then she did the you know, epic hike along what is now the West Coast Trail to rescue those shipwrecked sailors and saved their lives. Yeah.
There's these two books written called Keepers of the Light by a man named Don Graham, who wasn't a keeper himself, and it talks a lot about talking about building on your Cape Beale story. He talks very much about how the wives were a very, very important part of the lighthouse team, and that in some cases they had to take over when their husbands were in capacities in some way.
Yes, so interesting. I've read a few of them, and I like, yeah, those stories are so interesting. Like they're like adventure stories almost. The lighthouse keepers of the lights. Yes.
This is really great. I'm excited to read it. Add it to my collection. What was you've got your favorite, not favorite, but what was the most surprising woman that you learned about for this book?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you so much for that. Someone who was really surprising. Yeah, Flores Ledoux. I probably should have heard of her, like that she had founded the Stampede, but I hadn't. I guess a few of the women who served in war were really interesting. Like I definitely never heard of them, and there are 4 of them there. So Mary Dover, Bertha Clark Jones, Joan Bamford Fletcher, and Mary Grey Eyes Reed. Just their contributions to war efforts were, yeah, really, really surprising. And then, what else? Just some of the artists were very, like, I hadn't heard of them. Eleanor Lexton was a really interesting artist, and she kind of turned her whole property into like almost an art school and welcomed anybody there. But yeah, probably the soldiers and the war veterans were probably the most surprising because they were just like not given really any credit whatsoever for very dangerous and very, kind of important work. So, thank you.
There's go ahead. The woman who was the dog sled midwife. I wonder how many lives she saved. Like not just babies, but the women.
Absolutely. So there's an amazing story about her, like in a newspaper. You can just Google Jenny Flett and it will come up. She apparently never lost a mom or a baby, like in all of her work, and which at that time and with the resources she had, so she would visit women in, like very small shacks, like teepees, most of the places no running water, and very basic, the tools she had with her. And she talked about just the patience that she took, and completely very dangerous work. And I believe she learned it from her mother, I believe, or auntie. I'd have to look. And she also she learned most of it though from like a huge medical dictionary, like book. And she just like read it and learned it and taught herself essentially, and learned from her mentor, so, hands-on learning from her mentor. So pretty amazing. I loved her story. Yeah, and just dangerous, like to even get there, for her to go through snowstorms and really remote places where like no one's coming to help you. She'd go by horseback sometimes, but yeah.
Where was she?
Fort Chip.
So that's
Yeah.
was remote to start with.
Yeah, far north Alberta. Yeah.
There's a wonderful story about a Nanaimo woman who was the first first woman to graduate law school in Saskatchewan. She moved out here on her own. She and her sister and mother had come on a kind of weird, well, it was fairly common, sort of boat to bring proper women to Canada, as opposed to women with a shadier reputation.
God.
So she's the first woman to graduate from law school there, and then she moves to Nanaimo, and she's a very early counselor here, and she's often forgotten because her name is Hall, her last name is Hall, and there's another woman with a very similar name. So this woman kind of got forgotten. She never married. I have never seen a single person who's on that many committees in my life.
Wow.
She's on everything from sewers to whatever the equivalent of Parks and Rec was then, to the legal committee. She's on everything. She eventually retires and moves to Victoria. She had a sister, though, who did get married and have children. And when we actually put that story out on something, I can't remember, some social media we had, and the sister's granddaughter contacted us. And then the University of Saskatchewan contacted us because they knew nothing about her. So it's so important that you bring these stories up, because they're all sort of just sitting there waiting to be plucked, kind of.
Wow.
It's really cool.
Yes.
And this is a Nanaimo story, so I think that's why we kind of focused on it. But really
That's
fascinating.
amazing. Yes, and I think information is shared just so differently. And so, trying to, like in newspapers, I had to really, dive into the I think it was like the UVic archives of newspapers I used, and search by keyword and then go through article after article. And so very time consuming, and neat to try to pull it all into one place.
If you want a fun woman, Ladysmith had a woman named Verna Felton who came there every year and performed in a kind of summer theater, sort of whatever little plays they put on. But it turns out you'll know who she is because she played the voice of the fairy godmother in the original Cinderella animation. She was also my personal favorite, Fred Flintstone's mother-in-law. And when you see a picture of her, the drawing is not off. Like they obviously based the drawing of Fred's, well, I can't remember her name, Mrs. Wilma's mother. It's very similar. And then she was also won I think it's an Emmy in the 50s for a show called something like Daisy Sunshine or some kind of a sitcom. So she lived out her final years in Ladysmith of all places.
Oh, wow.
Just an interesting kind of,
Another book coming up.
yeah.
Those are amazing stories. Yes.
Question.
Yes.
Janet Mitchell and her artists, do you recall what her story is?
Yes. She was a painter.
Ontario or out west? Or
She was, I believe, I think it was Alberta. I believe it was Alberta. Maybe even Calgary. I'd have to look. Yeah. But the painters were amazing to see. Yeah, it was fun to look at their paintings, discover a little about them, and yeah.
Only because I knew it.
Oh, okay. Oh, really?
She was in Ontario, so.
Oh, okay. And she might have, I believe she was adopted, Janet Mitchell, if I'm remembering correctly. So she could have like moved from somewhere else, but I do believe she was like, lived in an adoptive home.
I think it's kind of interesting. Many major art galleries, and I think the one in Edmonton started because of a women's committee and so on, and then, they pulled in the rest later.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I could definitely see that. The artists were a lot of fun. Catherine White was another really interesting one up there in the middle, third down. She was a visual artist, and the White Museum of the Canadian Rockies is named after her, and I believe it's even her old house. Like the building was her and her husband's old house, and she just did amazing work and was instrumental in getting that museum going, and donated a lot of their things to it and that. So I just want to thank you very much for having me, and thanks very much. Oh, you want me to stay? Okay, thanks.
Were there any other questions? Good. Haley, that was fantastic. It was interesting. It was humorous. I really appreciated it. On behalf of the Historical Society, thank you for coming. I sort of felt a personal connection to this because Violet King Henry did a lot of work with the YMCA in the US. And when I was living at the YMCA in Ottawa during Canada 125 for immigration, I made friends. I was a co-op student, made friends with the library students, which I'm sure doesn't surprise Christine, and learned a lot about history. And I started a book on inspiring women in Canada because I couldn't find any, and I'd seen there were these US books. But it was so much work. Like, I got my list, and I realized that the amount of research I would have to do to uncover these women. And then the thing is, you need an intersectional lens, which really I think is outstanding with the work that has been done here, because most of the information I could find about women at that time was like Catherine Partrail and her sister Suzanne and Moody, like rich, privileged women who came and wrote about their son. They're sad that their tea set might get broken, kind of thing. So this is a huge amount of work to bring this in, and also anchoring us in that perspective that in spite of how far we've come, Indigenous women didn't get the vote till 1960. Chinese women, it was in the late 1940s. Incarcerated women, I think it was 2002. So there is a lot of work to do still, but this is so great to have brought forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just have a couple of them here, and then this one will be out on April 21st, and it can be found at any local bookstore or online. But like Window Seat or Fireside in Parksville, or just ordering it